My Hero Academia is a masterpiece in storytelling. What looks like a typical superhero story ends up being a thorough dissection of the intentionally flawed world Kohei Horikoshi created. From beginning to end, we watch the Hero Society slowly stumble until it crashes, and after all has been burned away, is rebuilt into something greater. And the series does a masterful job of taking the reader through that process from start to finish. Over the course of 430 chapters, we are entangled with a world that begins and ends on the idea that anyone can be a hero. When we begin My Hero Academia, the world feels safe and secure. There are still crimes happening like any other place, but All Might is there. As long as All Might is there, society believes everything will be fine. He's the symbol of peace, both literally but also figuratively. His presence looms over all the villains, keeping them in check. They are afraid of his wrath, so they lay hidden. But on the flip side, for heroes, he is the inspiring figure. All Might is cited as the principal inspiration for a good chunk of the heroes in the series, particularly Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, but many more can be counted among them. All Might functions as this inspiration for the future generation to be a hero like him. His pure-hearted dedication to saving people inspires children who see him as the larger-than-life figure that he is. All Might is this impenetrable figure that cannot and should not be messed with. Even after the Nomu's first attack, society's not disrupted too much because they are still putting their hopes and security on All Might. The symbol of peace hasn't faltered yet. This isn't to say others aren't helping. The pro-heroes are also around doing their best to keep people safe and secure, and to some extent inspiring others as well, just not to the extent of All Might. They may not be as influential, but their presence is still vitally important. The average person knows this, but they haven't realized just how much they rely on the pro-heroes. The first flaw of the Hero Society My Hero Academia operates under is that it places all of the burden on the pro-heroes. The average folk can't do anything to stop a villain, so they relinquish themselves to pleading for help. And sometimes this is definitely necessary, but none of them ever bother to look beyond the surface. They see a villain and are afraid, so they call for help. Any problem becomes a pro-hero's problem when it doesn't necessarily need to be. As long as All Might is around, they can place their fears and burdens on him, but this refusal to face the darker depths of society is what leads it to his first stumble on the path towards destruction. Stain's entry into the story posits the first question of the current society. Are the heroes truly in it to save people, or are they just there for fame and attention? It's an honest question of a society that idolizes pro-heroes as these paragons of safety and security. How many are in it because their heart cries out to save people, and how many are there to become famous or for the money? Stain sees All Might as this paragon of the righteous heroes, those purely in it to save people. He's the one hero that Stain believes in and continues to believe in. His reappearance in the story shows his respect for All Might at his lowest and sets him on the right path that leads him back into the fray as Iron Might. However, the rest of society ends up feeling the ripples of Stain in a more negative way, but not necessarily an incorrect way. Both Toga and Spinner were products of Stain's legacy. His words and actions rippled out to create new villains who were fed up with the unjust system. Stain may have had more specific issues, but both Toga and Spinner take his notions and run with them. The underbelly of society rises as Stain inspires a new wave of people who are willing to call out the hypocrisy of the current hero society. They know things as they stand are very flawed because they're victims of the flawed system. Spinner is a victim of discrimination, and Stain's action caused him to rise up and take action to the point of donning an appearance similar to Stain's. Toga is brought up as this weird child rejected by those around her for her quirk and her unique personality. Neither Spinner nor Toga were allowed into society. The current state only allowed for acceptable quirks and people while offloading the unacceptable ones onto the heroes in hopes that they would do something about it. It's no surprise Spinner and Toga turned out as they did. They had no heroes to look up to. So instead, they turned to the villains. No hero would reach out their hand to help, so they grabbed Stain's. Stain's lasting legacy in the series is that he acts as one of the primary forces for instigating change in the Hero Society. He will not accept complacency and tries to force the people to change and work towards a better society. He wants to create a world of pure heroes because he sees an injustice and flaw in the current system and the heroes that exist in it. And while his actions were definitely extreme, his motivation was to improve society. He just killed a lot of people to try and get that point across. Stain, however, serves as the first seed of disruption, but soon a much bigger event would disrupt society for good. What happens to society when the symbol of peace falls? The shining light deterring all evildoers has exited the stage, and the natural thing happens. All Might was the lid keeping society together, but now the lid is blown open. The people are afraid of society without All Might. He was their inspiration, their protection. What will happen now is the forefront question for every man, woman, and child without the means to protect themselves. An interesting thing to note about the end of the All for One versus All Might fight is how this ending is treated. All Might looks towards the future with his famous, he trusts the future generations with the responsibility to create a better society. His inspiration has created a new age of heroes who want to be the pure hero he was. His presence fosters them to grow, and he trusts them to carry society into a brighter future. The average person, on the other hand, is afraid of the immediate future. They don't care who, they just need someone to place their burdens on. They need another All Might now, regardless of the fact that no one could fill that role. But they try desperately to fill the vacuum. The people turn towards Endeavor to be the next symbol of peace, and try as he might, he is no All Might. He was just the number 2 hero who became the top hero by default, but none of the actual qualities matter to the average person. They just don't want to be left in a society without heroes. They rest all their fears on the heroes instead of reflecting on how things got to be this way. They expect the heroes to figure it all out, but that's impossible, and the villains know it's impossible. It's here that Horikoshi begins to unpack the villains a bit more and set up the endgame of the future conflicts. Gentle arrives and offers a glimpse into the failing of the society. He tried to be a hero, but took the wrong step and was radicalized into a villain. He had good intentions initially, but society ridiculed him until he couldn't take it anymore. The hero society was never a stable one, and through Gentle's backstory we see one of the primary flaws of that society. He's the example we're given, but he's hardly the only example of people who were shamed into villainy. And as we enter the final saga of My Hero Academia, we see just how deep the rot has reached and radicalized so many into turning against the current system. It's unquestionably broken, and there's no path for redemption or resurrection. The current hero society needed to fall. It was built resting entirely on pro-heroes to solve everything. Whenever something was amiss, the people turned to the heroes. They never tried to help, they just offloaded the burden. And through the My Villain Academia arc and beyond, we see the society that failed and created the antagonists of the series. Toga's unique personality ostracized her as even her family turned their back on her. She was too weird, and so she was abandoned. She was just a child, but instead of being raised, she was offloaded to the wastes where no one tried to save her. Twice suffered a similar fate. He was someone who just wanted friends, he just wanted company, but society rejected him. He lost everything and was left alone, and no one tried to save him. Twice's death feels particularly sad because he trusted Hawks. He genuinely thought he'd made a new friend, but was killed by that same friend. It feels awful, even though Twice is a villain. And then there's Shigaraki, who is a victim of an overwhelming power that took everything from him by accident, and then everything spiraled from there. His powers appeared and his family died along with the discovery. He could not control it, and as he wandered the world trying to find something, really anything, he was rejected by it. No one would save him. They simply reassured him that a hero would come soon. The most damning part of the hero society rests on that phrase, a hero will help you soon. They would not do anything but run away and hope that a hero would fix it, but ultimately, there are only so many heroes and they can't fix everything. There are moments in every villain's origins where you can pinpoint the place where things could have been different, where they could have been a hero or at the very least not a villain. If someone had tried to understand Toga, if someone had tried to earnestly be Twice's friend, if someone had reached out to help Shigaraki. Some of these villains had external factors that made it more difficult, mainly thanks to All for One, but there are still moments where things could have been different. If someone had done something, then maybe a villain would not have become a villain. But instead of that, the average person lashes out at the pro-heroes because they refuse to accept any semblance of responsibility for making the world as it is. It's entirely unsurprising that so many pro-heroes quit after the failed raid and Shigaraki's destruction. Many were pro-heroes by trade, and the burden of everything having gone out the window was just too much to bear. This was their job, and they needed to get out. And when you add on to that all of the people berating them for failing to stop Shigaraki and All for One, it's no wonder they stopped. Anyone in customer service knows how awful it feels to be harassed for not measuring up to an impossible metric. It's always your fault for something being wrong when it's rarely ever the case. The pro-heroes are just expected to grin and bear it, but it's not for the faint of heart. And so they retire and leave society with those who earnestly desire to save people. Ultimately, it was a much more effective way of thinning the herd than Stain's. However, there's a key thing to note amidst all the chaos. All of the students stay the course. They don't give up under the burden. The influence of All Might can be felt through each and every one of them. Their hearts are set solely on saving people. All Might put his trust in the future generation, and it's here where that begins to come to fruition. even if ultimately the people doing most of the saving are high school students, which probably isn't the greatest look. Their earnest desire is what starts to open the hearts and minds of the average person stuck in UA. Uraraka's speech to let Deku back into UA is one of the most effective distillations of what a hero is propped up against what society wants that hero to be. They want Deku to be out there constantly fighting when in reality he is a human who needs to rest. He can't fight forever even if society wants him to. And as Uraraka cuts through them to finally let him in, you see the hearts of the people beginning to understand where things went wrong as a society. And it's here that the final war truly begins, and Horikoshi answers every failure of a hero society with a character who represents what it should be and what it can be. Every fight in the final war arc is an answer to the failures of society from one who endeavors to do better. We see someone failed by the system versus someone who seeks to set it upright once more. After Gentle makes Deku question what makes a villain become that way, his worldview is changed forever. Between that and the glimpses into each other's memories, Deku sees the child in Shigaraki who was tossed aside despite being a scared child. Shigaraki never intended to kill so much of his family. His powers awakened and everything fell apart around him. He was another child abandoned by society that no one bothered to save. The elderly lady passes responsibility off under the nebulous idea of a hero coming to save them. But Deku enters as that hero. He is the one who will save Shigaraki. He acknowledges the destruction but still desires to save him. He's a pure hero inspired by All Might's pure heroics. Deku and Shigaraki are only the tip of the iceberg. The Toga and Uraraka fight is one of coming to an understanding and acceptance of someone. Toga was rejected because she was deemed weird by society. Her family sent her away to try and force her to become normal, but instead it just warped her even more. No one ever saw Toga for who she was, that is until Uraraka enters the picture. The result of their fight is Uraraka agonizing over what could have been if someone had genuinely tried to understand Toga. Like every other villain, Uraraka hurts over the idea that Toga could have turned out differently. She could have been led away from the path of a villain, but instead everyone failed her and led her into becoming a villain. Uraraka earnestly wanted to save Toga. The Todoroki family fight is a fight that is the failure of endeavor. He wanted to create the perfect hero, the perfect quirk, but in doing so, destroyed his family. Shoto fights Dabi to try and understand and connect with his long-lost brother. It's a battle of two human beings, not necessarily as the products of Endeavor's failure. Regardless of who is perfect or not, Shoto wants to see his brother as he is, without all the boiling rage. And then you add in Endeavor, who acknowledges and owns up to his failure and lives the rest of his life in atonement of that. He knows he can't be forgiven and his family owes him no forgiveness. He takes responsibility for his failures even though both Shoto and Dabi were exactly what Endeavor wanted all along. He was blinded by his pursuit of perfection and in turn burned everything around him. And lastly, there's the Shoji and Spinner fight to try and combat the discrimination that heteromorphs face in hero society. Shoji fights to be an inspiration to combat the discrimination. He wants to be so cool people will think otherwise about hate. Spinner, on the other hand, gets lost in the whims of All for One. His identity is fading as he tries to make change by furthering the cycle of destruction. Hate only brings more hate, and Shoji desires to end that cycle and work towards a harmonious one, even if he knows he's just a step on that path. The final war arc of My Hero Academia is the failures of the past society being combated by the present and the future. Every major fight is spearheaded by the future generation. The heroes of the All Might era are still giving it their all, but the future is in the hands of the students. Everyone from All Might to Deku understands the system failed and unite to work towards a brighter future. They will not repeat the past, but instead will work towards a harmonious society, towards a future where heroes will have too much time on their hands. The final message of My Hero Academia is that every villain is still a person. There were circumstances that made them that way. They still committed evil deeds, but they were not purely paragons of evil. Shigaraki had interests and cared about the other members of the League and the villains. He wanted to be their hero. But he was still failed by society and left to fester under the grasp of All for One. The hero's victory is a signal for society to never forget what broke it, and then to use that knowledge to build a better future. The pro-heroes are ultimately only human. They cannot bear the burden of the world. In order to rebuild society, everyone must do their part. Everyone needs to step up and be a hero. Instead of turning a blind eye to the problems and to those who are vulnerable, people have to reach out and help each other. The ideal hero society is one of supporting each other, whether it be the elderly lady who left Shigaraki not repeating the same mistake and deciding to reach out and help, or if it's Class 1A being there to support Uraraka as she struggles with the fallout of Toga's death. No one should ever have to bear their burdens alone. It should always be people willing to lend a hand. The new version of society is the true version of the idea that anyone can be a hero. They're the flashy heroes, but also those who lend a helping hand to those in need. Everyone is only human. They need the support of others in order to survive and thrive. That idea remains constant whether you're the #1 hero or just a random citizen on the streets. And Hawks understands this as he builds a new society around these countless heroes. For every pro hero, there is someone who stepped in to do the right thing. The society will continue to foster as long as everyone contributes to the weaving. Horikoshi recently did an interview for Viz where he was asked what being a hero means to him, and his response sums up the final statement of My Hero Academia perfectly. He says, initially, heroes were those on a different level from me, like Oda-sensei or fictional characters like Goku from Dragon Ball. But as I entered my 30s, I began to appreciate those people nearby who offer support. My appreciation has been growing towards the people who extend a helping hand or offer encouragement. I've grown to see these everyday helpers as heroes too. So now, I think anyone can be a hero, including those who support me closely. My Hero Academia is a masterpiece because it follows this progression. The main moral of My Hero Academia from start to finish is that anyone can be a hero. You don't need fancy superpowers as long as you reach out to help and support others. You may not be a nationally recognized hero, but as long as you're a hero to someone, that's all that matters. Because you too can be a hero.